Hello and welcome to another Unsourced Wall. As always, my name is Elvis and I am your host. Okay, so this is going to be a bit of a short episode in terms of reviews, but there are some actual news pieces that I want to get into a bit more. So let's just head on right into it with news topics. First off, in movie news, there's actually a wealth of DC news over Marvel in terms of stuff actually having to do with their movies. I'll mention only a bit of Marvel stuff right now just to get it out of the way. Apparently, there's been test screenings of Captain Marvel, and the big standout seems to be the cat. There's this article making the rounds about how the cat stole the show and was the highlight of the entire experience. I mean, tough break if a cat is the most memorable thing about your movie, but it's just like the comics in that way, I guess. And they're also saying that Michael B. Jordan is returning as Killmonger for Black Panther 2, which makes sense because I guess they all go to that Black Panther afterlife that was shown in the first movie, but the prevailing sentiment seems to be that they're trying to course correct because Michael B. Jordan was the most long-lasting, memorable thing about that first movie as well. So who knows? I think that it's still kind of an interesting idea and we'll see what they'll do with it. Anyway, moving along with DC movie news, they've actually announced a whole slew of new stuff. Right off the bat, we have an update on Matt Reeves' Batman movie, which will be moving ahead with another actor and replacing Ben Affleck. Now, it's still not certain whether this movie will actually be in continuity or not, but it's stated to be going for more of a noir tone with a younger Batman. So that might be cool. I mean, hope it works, and it could be a nice direction to take things in that is actually more distinguishable from other ones. Next up is that we're getting more details on James Gunn's Suicide Squad sequel, which is actually being framed as a Saw reboot called The Suicide Squad, featuring an entirely new cast and characters. The nonchalantness of the title aside, the way the added "the" sounds makes me hope that it's actually going to be about Rick Flag Sr. and his dirty dozen going about it in World War II. I mean, if they're going to do this whole Saw reboot stuff, they should just go all out. And honestly, I can't wait to see what Gunn has cooked up. Lastly, WB is still moving ahead with the Super Pets movie. Hats off to them. I'm pulling for them and fingers crossed they can make something really manageable with that. Oh, and almost forgot. We actually got our first teaser for the Birds of Prey movie, which was just a quick montage of the main cast all posing in costume. And, well, I guess it just looks really cheap. Not that the costumes are to blame here, and they're going for an intentionally dressed down feel, so that doesn't really apply. But more the framing and shooting of the teaser really feels underdone and underthought. More like a home video kind of quality. Which is striking because when you compare it to the similarly threadbare teaser to the Joker movie, that just had a lot more inherent style to it. Even though it was stated to be just a makeup test, it is still kind of like a very memorable and very pinpointed little announcement. But I guess it's all about what you make it. Moving on to TV news, we're actually still not quite done. Perhaps most interesting is that the Invincible animated series for Amazon Prime has actually found a bit of its cast. Stephen Yeun, J.K. Simmons, and Mark Hamill will be among those joining the show in lead roles. Apparently, Yeun will be playing Mark, aka Invincible, Simmons will be playing Omni-Man, his dad, and Hamill will be in some unspecified role. I hope that role is actually Robot's robot voice because I feel like that would work. There are other characters that Hamill would be pigeonholed into being, whereas Robot's robot voice would be a lot more kind of striking, and I think he could pull it off really well. Anyway, like I said before, I'm anticipating the show and I hope that it learns and improves from where the comic did sag and really kind of drag things out from. Fingers crossed. We've also been getting more details on Titans Season 2, which is apparently looking to cast Deathstroke, Ravager, and Jericho. So it seems like this season is actually leading into some outright Deathstroke family shenanigans. And I'm all here for that. It can be exceedingly fun when done right, and I hope they can pull it off, because it's my jam, you know? Speaking of Titans though, we also have a first look of Donna Troy in her Wonder Girl costume, pulling straight from like the late 70s, early 80s iteration of the character, being a predominantly red outfit with yellow stars about the torso. It looks fine, and I'm glad that it means that Donna will continue to be part of the show. I did have some small nitpicks about her use in the first season, but her interplay was fun, and it would have been missed if they had just kind of dropped it. So glad to see that they're setting her up for a better, bigger role in this one. Anyway, let's go on into comic news, of which there's not much. The main thing, though, in comic news would be that there was this new interview with the writer of the upcoming Female Furies mini that is giving me straight up Tom King vibes. in the bad way. It reminds me so much of King's interview before Mr. Miracle dropped, where he went on to call Orion spoiled, upper class, and a wannabe tough guy who always had it easy, which is never a good thing to remind someone of. In this case, writer Cecil Castellucci is giving more of the context of their mini, apparently honing in on what they feel is a misogynistic undercurrent that was inherent in the Fourth World via Apocalypse. Like Granny being in charge of the orphanage because she's a woman, because it's a woman's work. They even go on to say they don't think that Kirby meant to be misogynist, but was rather amplifying the misogyny of the times through aspects like that. And that all this was self-evident, and the actual reason for why Big Barda defected in the first place, i.e. there's a reason Big Barda left. And I'm fine with a new take. I really am, but there's this idea that this is working off of something that was obviously ingrained in the stories, which doesn't really have any basis. It's taking a lot of leaps and is seemingly more mistaking the archetypical for a specific underlying social critique, when it's more a broad critique on dehumanization, militaristic fervor, and feeding off of old school fears and anxieties about horrible upbringings and childhoods. Or the fact that everyone is subservient to Darkseid, even his inner circle, like Desaad being the actual second command of Apocalypse, and even that not saving him from Darkseid's abuse, or even being vaporized into dust the moment he stepped out of bounds. Or that the boys of Apocalypse get broken into will-less, mindless soldier boys, while the Furies themselves retain their personalities. Or that the real kind of honed-in misogynistic stuff that Kirby does play into with the Fourth World comes mainly from when the Furies reach Earth, because everyone already knows not to fuck with him in Apocalypse. I'm still going to give this mini a chance, and I hope it's good, but this just feels like it's coming from a place that is going to make this kind of strange to read. I mean, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that line about how there's a reason Big Barda left. Because how did they connect any of these disparate dots? When it comes to interviews like this, I'm always taken back to Mark Russell's interviews about Prez, because that was a case where the writer did say a lot of things that I fervently disagreed with, and I felt like they were missing the mark entirely, but were able to use that take they had of the general sort of character base and format it into a really engaging, unique vision of the story and the series. Like with Mark Russell, he felt that the original Press series was a piss take of youth culture at the time and meant to be very disingenuous, and I felt like that was completely off base, and I still do. But it enabled him to write a very captivating picture of a downcast, kind of surly, but kind of grumly, but also still having the heart of gold, older Prez Rickard in his Prez series. And I really loved that. I thought that was really magnificent. So I guess it's all about how it's executed. And so that's why, even with Mr. Miracle, when King said all that bullshit about Orion, I was still willing to give it a chance because I wanted to see how he was able to pull it off. And so that's the same thing with the Female Furies mini. I don't agree with a lot of what was said in this interview, but fingers crossed that it still ends up being good. Really, I just really want good New Gods content, and it's been so long. Anyway, here we go into what I read this week. First, Heroes in Crisis number 5. This is a bit of a tough one because it's still just boring as hell. It's really hard to say anything about it at this point. It's a big load of nothing. Small dialogues thrown about 18 pages, and it's framed as something deep and introspective. It's kind of laughable, and it's funny to see how people really seem to be losing patience with it in general. Funny because it took this long, and because they still won't ever admit that King has been doing this for like the last 2 to 3 years. It's actually insane, especially since there's so many pinups and useless art excursions that really just pad everything out, and it feels soulless and insubstantial. 2 thumbs down. Next up, we have Fight Club 3 number 1, and I don't know why I read this. Maybe because of some small hope that it wouldn't be as bad as its predecessor. And for the most part, it actually wasn't. It still wasn't any good, but it wasn't as bad. Then again, Fight Club 2 didn't start off as bad as it got either. And this doesn't start off as good. The issue is really just a mangled montage of old beats we've seen before in this series. It's just too little for way too silly. Just another narrator wakes up in an unfamiliar situation after being in the dumps, and Tyler doing some scheming and feeding off that whole really depressed nature of the character. But at least it's not some really weak and underthought meta commentary for the most part. I was actually lulled into complacency by the unoriginality of most of it, and about to comment on how bold it was that Fight Club 3 to pretend that Fight Club 2 didn't end in this insanely, amazingly goofy way. okay. But then we get hit by some magical, metaphorical, like obsessive painter who goes and shows people dream paintings or something like that. It's all unspoken, but it's the wacky stuff, and I can tell this is going to go nosediving extremely fast to where the last one went. So middle thumb down. And really, that's about it. It's a short week, but it does leave a lot of brisk room. And hope next week is better. There's a lot of things coming out, and I really have my fingers crossed that it's going to be a good week of releases. Now we're moving on into our watch this week with another episode of Gotham. Already close to the middle of the season, and according to reports, we're already halfway before the time skip. So what exactly did it do? For an episode aptly called Panadora, it actually brought in what was meant to be the main thrust of this final arc, Bane, or Bane Sr. But in that sense, mixing legacies has always been how Gotham has rolled anyway. But it's actually overall an entertaining episode, one that relies on a lot of established gags and kooky set pieces, giving it a focused and true to show tone, but also interjects a lot of circular character stuff that is kind of interesting and very fitting for a final season. On the former side, one of the best moments of the episode, maybe even in the entire series, is Riddler having trapped Gordon and Bane Sr. into a death trap, and Gordon having to go through some roundabout hoops to get them out of it. Bane Sr. is incredulous at how ridiculous Gotham and its criminals are, and all Gordon can do is just shrug and say you get used to it. And that's what the show is really all about. Other than that, you have Riddler getting tortured by dog-loving white trash, getting open brain surgery while conscious by completely orgasmic Hugo Strange, and a wonderful bit where Penguin turns away from Riddler for 1 second and then he's vanished. Well, I guess Riddler kind of steals the show of this episode. They make some real use of him in some well-honed set pieces, and I'm all for it because it's pulled off with the finesse and energy that I've been missing from this series so far. It might not be a roller coaster insane episode, but it just knows what works with this show's mix of drama and humor. The character stuff, as I've mentioned, really comes into play sparingly, but with a nice amount of punch. The more minimal one is this slight undercurrent of Bullock feeling left out due to Bane Sr.'s presence and previous friendship with Gordon, and it's actually a bit heartening. Donald Logue pulls off that whole wounded and kind of cast aside jealous feeling, and before the other shoe drops on Bane Sr. being evil, it's actually kind of hard to see, and it really does succinctly show how far the dynamic between the two has evolved and progressed in the past 4 seasons between this one and the first. So yeah, no, that was really stellar. The other larger character conflict comes from Bruce and Selina. It's set up and framed like a typical Batman hates it when people try to kill the Joker moment, because she did stab him a couple of times in the chest. But it reveals a lot more of the underlying connotations behind it. Basically, the big unspoken truth being that Selina did witness the Wayne's murder. That's been known. But while Bruce has spent the series feeling like this is a big part of their kinship, Selina reveals that just the one thing that separates them. And it's played very well by these two young actors, and it is the exact right plot beat to bring up right now when things are at an impasse. Either it would set them both on a path for their futures, or reconcile them, or kind of just mess everything up, but it's still all really engaging. And honestly, this was a tremendous episode. I overall really enjoyed it. With only 8 episodes to go, I really do hope that's finally settled into that old Gotham groove. Anyway, 2 thumbs up. Can't wait for next week. And with that, we have listener questions. And our first comes from the ever-great AkiCat on Twitter. And their question is, which Hanna-Barbera cartoon do you want to be written by Mark Russell? Excluding things he's already written. And the truthful answer to that is Top Cat. I know there's a lot of things still out there. And there's also rumors that DC is being told to shutter the Hanna-Barbera line due to concerns about how they're managing them. But yeah, Top Cat. Mainly because while I would have liked to have seen a series or even miniseries written by DiDio back when that original backup with Catwoman and Batman came out years ago, it doesn't really seem like he has the same kind of touch to it in the recent Superman crossover one-shot. There was a lot to go with, especially with Top Cat being a very sort sort of skeevy, grimy, and shady character now in the mold of a kind of mafia don. Just very unlikable and very scathing kind of character that I feel was honestly a really interesting and entertaining direction to take it with. Just that sort of cynical and downcast, wry eye to it, I feel like Russell could do a lot with, because he sort of has just that cutting side to his writing. In any case, I would like to see Top Cat pop up anywhere, but with Russell, I would be more ecstatic than not. Anyway, I hope that answered your question to a great satisfaction, Aki Cat, and thank you. Our second question comes from the ever amazing Illuminated, and their question is comic adaptations of novels. Have any ever worked, and have I read any? And the answer to those is in order. Sometimes to maybe, and yes, I have read a few. Now, it's a bit hard to really parse down because of the old school tradition of the illustrated classics, which still have a place here and there and never seemed fully go out of style, to taking a story and aiming to reformat it directly into working as another visual medium. Either way, they both have the same kind of pitfall sometimes. That being taking something that can be all prose, narration, or inner monologue and making it something that works and complements another aspect of the entertainment experience. One of the main things that I feel holds some comic adaptations of novels back is, well, turning the actual narration and monologues into narration and monologues. So you have pages that are inundated with caption boxes galore in order to squeeze in as much of the words from the actual novel as could possibly fit. You see the same things with movies as well, where a character will drone on about some inner state of mind or faculty because it would have been maybe harder, understandably so, for the creatives or directors or screenwriters behind it to portray the internal through external means. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's perfectly balanced to a point where the artist feels like they're working in tandem with the prose and the portraiture of the art. Other times it just feels cluttered, claustrophobic, and tiresome. In terms of comics, I've seen both spectrums done with a whole host of Lovecraft stories, for example, and his novellas adapted into comics. If you wanted to see an example from a movie, then if you dare, check out the movie version of Michael Chabon's Wonder Boys, because dear God, that goes full hog into cramming in as much narration that we didn't really need to overstuff a movie that needed, I guess, the internal quotient. Most other comics, though, the ones that try to make it feel uniquely like a comic, sometimes hit the mark. A few that pop to mind are Rob Davis's adaptation of Don Quixote, or this small one-chapter adaptation of Chuck Palahniuk's Invisible Monsters, Junji Ito's Frankenstein, or even the prologue to Fight Club 2 with art by Cameron Stewart, which adapts the final chapter of Fight Club itself, so I'm still using that. Not to speak to the quality of any of these, but they do put in a lot of effort in terms of the format, depiction, atmosphere, and caricature to make a lot of these unstated mental fronts of the prose apparent through the congress of the art. In terms of Davis's Quixote, where the original novel features some incredible and honestly sometimes very disparate flights of fancy and cluster stories, this adaptation pulls them all in superbly, moving swiftly through cartoon fluidity and flexibility of style, making use of the exact sort of nature of comics to really be shown in a variety of ways. While others, like the one-chapter Invisible Monsters and Junji Ito's manga adaptation of Frankenstein, focus more on tone and mood to get the point across, sometimes really zeroing in on a specific atmospherical tangent that maybe sometimes would be lost in a shuffle in prose, that sometimes can't really be expressed in prose in that capably as well, but can be done more justice through a visual medium. And in a third camp, you have the Fight Club 2 prologue, which sort of acts as a bridge between these two camps, where you have something that makes use of a lot of the direct narration and monologues and dialogues of the actual work, while also putting your own spin on it in terms of Stewart's art, really focusing in on, well, the stylistic nature of comics and really messing with the format and structure of the panels and the structure of the page itself in order to really not only make use of the word in order to keep as much of the same kind of content and substance, while also not making it so standard and strict, and even putting its own twists on it in order to elucidate some maybe even divergent plot beat that wasn't there before, but still fitting in seamlessly because of this. In the end, I feel like the two main camps, one that is more on reading the novel in a format that includes comics as sort of a different channel, or the other that is more about reading a comic that retells a novel, that they both can work and that they can be very enjoyable. But I do prefer the latter. Not that it ever really can be said to be one-to-one with a novel. It just allows itself to fully take advantage of an entirely new medium more. And that's pretty wonderful. And I hope that made any lick of sense, Illuminated, and I hope that it answered your question to the fullest of my ability, because I really tried. And of the ones I mentioned, I really would recommend Rob Davis's Don Quixote and Junji Ito's Frankenstein. They're a kick. They really are. Anyway, I just want to say thank you so much to both Hacky Cat and Illuminated for sending in their questions. It means so much. I really had so much fun answering them, and I really hope I did both of them justice. I really do. I am so grateful for any questions or comments or feedback that I've been getting. It really does mean a lot, and it still astounds me to this day. So if there's anyone out there who has their own questions, comments, or topics they want to hear discussed on the show, you can find me on Twitter at THE_SNICKMAN, and I just want to give a shout out to the cover artist for this show at DOTEMCEE. Check out their page. They really deserve it. They're pretty amazing. Anyway, that's it for this week's episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you have a great week, and see you again next time.